Welcome to the Keen on Yoga podcast, a democratic endeavour to bring you more perspectives on life and practice from a diverse number of voices and backgrounds. Inclusivity is our aim, and polemics and dogma are our combatants, our enemies. We are not for a profit, so in not so many words, if you fancy donating, you're welcome to head over to keenonyoga.com podcasts. Any support is appreciated, and also please give freely as to feedback, advice, ideas, guests. Today's guest, on that note, is Zoe DePero, otherwise known as the Unruly Ascetic, or as my wife thought she was called, the Angry Ashtanga, which is not the case. She's not called that. Because it doesn't really present Zoe in the correct light, really. For like me, she loves the Ashtanga method, aspects of tradition here, and we both reminisce fondly to degrees about our time in Mysore. So it's simply that we both meet to democratise the progress and process of teaching Ashtanga and to disband many unhelpful myths cultivated actually in Mysore, and not by Sharathji, but by teachers going there. Many of those are actually around protectionism and fear of imposter syndrome back home. Money. However, it remains to be stressed that we are neither of us anti-Mysore. Neither of us are anti-Mysore. Instead, what we're interested in promoting is a more nuanced picture of the application of yoga. Because we love it. One, indeed, that can actually be found in Mysore itself. But somehow it ends up being lost in translation when teachers leave and go back home to their own shalas, and they end up teaching most literally and pedagogically a most authoritarian kind of Ashtanga yoga that is elitist and exclusive and harmful, not only physically and emotionally, and is not necessarily found originally in Mysore. Anyway, as always, it was an open discussion, fairly unplanned, so please forgive us if we're not always as clear as we might like to be, but it's spontaneous and free. And nevertheless, I hope you get the gist of what we're saying, or we're both working for in the public domain for Ashtanga yoga as a more pragmatic and approachable practice for all people, not only incredibly able-bodied or those with time and money to go to Mysore, but all those people in full-time work who don't come in the best of health, mothers struggling to bring up kids and adjust to practice, everyone. Anyway, welcome Zoe to the Keen on Yoga podcast. It's great to have you here. So welcome, Zoe, to the Keen on Yoga podcast. Thanks. Thank you. We're both thankful about being together, and I've really enjoyed your irreverential, somewhat Instagram over these last years, and it's taken a while to get around to you, but I'm really pleased that we're in that metaphorical room together now.
I feel like I just had the same connection with you and your posts on Facebook. I'm not sure how we became friends. I'm sure I friended you years and years ago. And I've loved your posts, and I've loved how you seem to be reflecting similar ideas.
That's really nice to hear. I think Facebook. Okay, so let's just start at the start, as I always do. I mean, for people that don't know you, they know your posts. What was your background with yoga and Ashtanga yoga, I suppose? Can you give a little bit of a small potted history of how you got into it and stuff, and maybe who were your early teachers, and just to give an idea about yourself?
Yeah, I started practicing yoga in college and went to India when I graduated from college because I didn't pursue a line of study that provided any work opportunities.
What did you do?
I studied history and religion at UVA.
Right. Yeah, I did philosophy, same.
Yeah. After school, I went to India and traveled a bit through the Integral Yoga organization, which has their main ashram not far from where I live in Virginia. So I spent a lot of time there and with those teachers studying integral yoga for a few years. And it's a wonderful, kind-hearted, gentle practice. And through that, I made friends who exposed me to other practices. I practiced with Dharma Mitra in New York for a while, and then was exposed to Ashtanga, and very early on did a workshop with Kino McGregor, who I think, as is true for many people, very much inspired me towards the practice. I was just practicing by myself at the time because there wasn't any Ashtanga in the city where I was living, and I would travel to see Kino and then eventually Tim. And after about a year and a half of practice, I decided to go to Mysore. So I started going to Mysore pretty early on in my Ashtanga career.
And that is early, actually. What did you think about it? Did your opinions change towards Mysore? What was your original thoughts?
I was at a weird stage in the Ashtanga Mysore community. I went the first year that you could register online. So I was kind of that first generation of people who could have some expectations about their experience. Like, we knew we were going to be able to get in. I think my second or third year, like, we were arranging apartments before we arrived.
Right.
So it was kind of less of an adventure than what I had been kind of hoping for, I think. But there's also, there's comfort in that, knowing that it's not a complete crapshoot. You're not going to spend thousands of dollars on this plane ticket and then get turned away. So I think there's some conflict there in that I loved the experience of it, and I loved immersing myself in this group of people who were also so excited to be there, but it wasn't the adventure that that people wrote about in their memoirs, or that you heard about when you went and talked to these big teachers about their experiences of going to Mysore. It was magical in its own way, but it wasn't mystical. If that distinction makes sense.
Yeah, I think at a certain point, Mysore became like a kind of like a college situation, didn't it? Yeah. It was not like a kind of adventure as such. But what did you think of the teaching itself? I mean, like, because I've got down here in my questions, have you always felt unruly? I can't say that word really, unruly. But like, because your posts are quite anarchic and they're quite anti-authoritarian. I've been called that as well. Like, I mean, and many people have interviewed me for podcasts. They do, oh, you're anti-Mysore, you're anti-authoritarian, and I say, well, no, that's actually not quite true. Like, that's a bit polarized, and I don't feel like that. And I had a great, I still have respect, a lot of respect for Sharathji, and still love that time there, and got a lot out of it, I suppose. Well, yeah. What are your feelings about that? Oh, but I'm mixed. Like, I'm not. I haven't dropped the Kool-Aid. That's there.
I think we're very, very similar in that. I've just discussed a little bit in my Instagram, but I'm a highly anxious person, and the practice and the system of deference to a teacher and strict adherence to the series was very soothing for me, because I didn't have to make decisions for myself, because I could just do what I was told and follow along. And in that first workshop that I took, Kino said that, you just take the time you need to take and you follow it methodically, and you kind of don't worry about the things that are not in front of you to work on. And that was so comforting to me. So the idea that I could go to this place and there are all these people who agreed that, yes, we follow these rules and this person makes decisions for us and we just go through it. That was very, very comforting, especially at a time in my life. I guess I was in my mid to late 20s when I really didn't know what I was doing and in my life, and I didn't have a lot of structure, and that was very soothing. So I definitely subscribed to the do as you're told mindset. And as I practiced, the longer I practiced, I continued to practice with Kino and Tim for years. For most of the time that I was going to Mysore, they were really wonderful mentors to me. But then there was the conflict of, is Shirat my teacher? Does he make decisions for my practice? Or is Kino my teacher? Or is Tim my teacher? And it took 8 or 9 years for me to realize that really, and this sounds a little harsh on all three of them, and I don't mean it. I don't mean it personally.
They're not listening anyway. None of them are listening, I'm sure. Don't worry about
it. People who love them very much are probably
yes.
But
that's
none
true.
of them were actually taking on the responsibility of being my teacher.
Right.
Like,
interesting.
None of them. I was willing to give that to them, but they were not taking that on. Like Shirat was giving me guidelines, and that was wonderful. And he took me on, once I was authorized, he had me assist him a handful of times, and he actually gave me a lot of really great direct instruction for helping people progress. I feel very fortunate that he did have a lot of very personal interaction with me, but it still wasn't like, here is your practice and here's why I'm making these decisions. And once I started going to Mysore a lot, Kino backed way off of making decisions for my practice because she said, Sharat's your teacher now. And Tim was always really great and always made time to like dialogue about choices and progress and why we could go one way or go another. But it always kind of boiled back to like, I had to just decide what to do and whose boundaries to accept. And that was so hard. It was so hard. And I felt so alone. And the whole thing kind of backfired because I had backed myself into this corner where I needed someone to tell me what to do. And I
suppose, can I just interject? What did you think you were going to get with it following these rules? I mean, because I did it as well. I mean, and I saw you there, and I think we met, and we were both, kind of like following the rules that I followed them meticulously for many years because of an anxiety disorder that I developed in the early 20s as well, actually, and it felt very comforting and soothing. But when I reflect back, I kind of think, well, like I came to yoga, with the full idea of the full package, right? Like self-understanding and that kind of thing. And then as soon enough, it became a kind of comfort blanket where if I just followed the rules and kind of did it every day in the way that was prescribed to do it, I kind of felt like comforted, I suppose, that I'd done what I ought to be doing and that I'd made the right choices with my day or something like that. But it didn't really reflect as to what that kind of rather rigid, not only the rigid practice, but the rigid lifestyle around it was actually aimed at, right? And what the teacher, right, and what the teacher, whoever that was aiming for me, and on my behalf, right?
What were we thinking? Like it's funny because I don't think I was. I don't think I had hoped that I would progress in the practice and, progress towards authority to the point that I would be able to teach and support myself financially through teaching. That's kind of the extent of it. I have been teaching yoga in general, if not specifically Ashtanga. And that was, like I said, kind of the only marketable skill I had. So for me, a lot of it was, I liked the practice. I took a great deal of comfort in the practice. If I just surrender wholly to what I'm told this method is, then if I dedicate myself in the right way, then I will be able to teach and people will come and it will work out. This sort of idea of like, if I create the right yoga karma, then the world
also, It's also kind of a bit like a pyramid selling, really, isn't it?
Oh,
if you you donate,
marketing.
You donate to me, and then you'll get something down the line, right? Which was kind of a little bit talking about me rather cynically before the podcast, that there is, I think earlier on in the days, like we go with mixed intentions, probably a lot of, most of us a lot of us being teachers. And certainly back in the time I was doing it, I don't think it was ever different from the start, really, that there was this understanding that, yes, it was a livelihood. You could make a living out of it, right? And when you're in Mysore, you pursued it accordingly there was a lot of pushing, a lot of jostling, a lot of trying to get next posture and advancement, and so you could authorization and all this stuff, and
and that's only escalated. I think it used to be like, oh, if you went to Mysore, then you're something of an authority, and then it was, oh, if you go to Mysore this many times, then you get.
It's like having a college degree, isn't it? It used to be like, well, you have a bachelor's, that's all right. Now it's like, well, no, that's just a start. You need to have a master's and the particular training and what you're doing, because it's just like it's market forces on yoga. Like, as capitalism amps up, it's like people have to be more and more pushy with it, I suppose. I was going to ask you, are you teaching now?
No.
I didn't. No, you're not. Right. Mm-mm. Okay. Right.
No, I had a small shala that I closed in the end of 2016. I went to the summer course that Shirat did. That was my last time in Mysore, and came back kind of realizing the stuff I've been talking about on my Instagram, and decided to close my shala for just personal reasons at home, but also because I was recognizing all of the dangers of teaching in this method. Like if you are not really straight with yourself and your relationship to your practice, your relationship to the system and the people who have been authority figures for you, then there's so much danger in terms of how you will influence other people's relationships to their practices as a teacher. And I was not confident that I wouldn't carry my own, not to be flippant, but not carry my own trauma around the community and the system and pass that on to other people.
What is the danger and how would you do that? Just to be more specific, maybe. Yeah.
I think.
Or what do you see are the dangers in the community, if we can nail it down a little bit more?
So you and I think we're good examples of people who subscribe to the authority, to comfort in the structure and the prescribed discipline, and it helped us and it soothed us. And over time, we grew out of that and grew into some self-awareness and some autonomy, and now are able to recognize, like, okay, I can't just let someone else or this system kind of make all my choices for me. But having subscribed to that for so long, I have really good, healthy patterns for making decisions for myself. And you kind of grow into the role of being your own guide. And it takes time, and it takes, you have to kind of defer for a long time to recognize, let the pendulum swing of like, it doesn't really work at this end and it doesn't really work at that end, but here is the healthy middle ground. But I think people are often teaching, especially with this, 3 trips to Mysore and you get your box checked and you're a teacher. For me, my 3rd trip, I've been practicing for 4 years and I was fully authorized to teach. That's crazy. And I understand being on the other side of the 10-year mark. I understand why I always heard you shouldn't teach until you've practiced for 10 years, because the authority of being the person making the decisions, the high of having people listen to you and do what you tell them and stay within the parameters that you set for them is dangerous. It's dangerous.
Right. Do you think so? Because the way I hear a lot of this, and I suppose because I haven't taught from that, even when I was in the kind of fold, as it were, I wasn't so prescriptive, I guess. But do you think, how do you think it really can have a detrimental aspect on people's emotional kind of well-being, right? In terms of how because essentially, if you're a teacher, unless you get over above yourself, you're just teaching asana. Like, do you think that has a graver implication for people's lives? Did you feel the sufferance, yourself?
I was never. I was never a super established teacher. I had a small shala with a very, very small program. I traveled a lot and I covered other people's programs. So I didn't have my own program consistently for a long period of time. So I always was teaching from a place of deferring to someone else's choices, which was very beneficial developmentally for me as a teacher to be able to say, like, look at a student and say, this is the choice I would make, but someone else has made this choice for them, and then dialoguing with the student and saying, this is the choice your teacher made. It's valuable for these reasons. This is the choice I would make, and it's valuable for these reasons. And then you have to decide for yourself. So that is how I developed as a teacher. Very, very verbal, hyper communicating about the pros and cons of different ways to progress and asking the student to consider for themselves and then decide which course they want to follow, and then ask them to be consistent with that decision for a pre-arranged length of time. And it took, like I said, years and years for me to be able to turn that around on myself and tell myself, like, wait, these things that you are asking of these students, you are not doing yourself. And so for me, my situation was different because I never got to be the sole authority figure. But I did see other people, or I would teach in a community and there would be another teacher somewhere who was treating their students in a very dictatorial, this is how you progress. You stop there. You show up every day. Why weren't you here? No. This is what discipline, this is what dedication looks like. And I saw that it was hurting people.
It's just ridiculous. Let me just stop you there. This is just a ridiculous mentality, I have to say. And I don't know where it came from, but it is so endemic. I hope it's lessening in the Ashtanga world now. This kind of proving your colours by, I get up at 1 o'clock. No, I get up at. I don't even sleep. I don't sleep. I sleep in a coffin, and I just get up. I don't even sleep at all. And
I don't sleep. I don't eat. I don't have a life. I don't talk to other people.
Therefore, I'm valid as a yoga teacher. What a shame. Before we go on this vein, I mean, what's the value that you've got out of? I mean, you still. The unruly ascetic, what is the value of asceticism or of keeping, what do you find as helpful? Because I don't want to piss all over tradition, because I got a lot out of the idea of tradition, even if the idea of parampara isn't really real. There was something in the symbolism of this whole thing, and that it had some background and history, and it wasn't made up by someone like a couple of 3 years ago, vast on holiday in Ibiza, high on drugs, and it had some resonance to me, and it kept me at it, and it kept me convinced. I think one thing, it kept me convinced, and that I needed, because I think doubt and self-doubt, and you get on the mat in the morning, you just think that's not right, what am I doing? You have this sequence, you have this system, it has an authority. There's many people for many years that have done it, and it gets you through day by day. That's my feeling of it.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's a very difficult discussion because discipline is so important, and dedication and a willingness to sacrifice ease and comfort for the sake of long-term stability is really...
Or just lifestyle choices. I'm not doing this because I want to get up in the morning. I'm not having a glass of wine because that's going to affect my practice. Or,
And I think it's one of those things we benefit so much from those early years where we do, you said drink the Kool-Aid, which is an incredibly morbid reference. So I mean it very flippantly, not literally, but I think those early years where we're really subscribing to the surrender idea is so beneficial, because because then you have the experience to go back to of it does work. If you make yourself show up and you sacrifice and you restrict and to prioritize being there on your mat and putting so much energy into it, it changes you. And I think there are phases of life for that if you approach the practice at a time in your life, like I did when you're in your 20s and you have no family or job or responsibilities, and you can do that, that's really wonderful. Because then as life has to ebb and flow and you want to let other things in that hinder your ability to restrict for the sake of asana progress, then you're better equipped to be able to judge and say, is it worth it? If I make this choice and I go down this path, am I centered enough in my practice of yoga that I will continue to live my practice if I do less asana and I have less time on my mat? Is my practice in my heart and my mind established enough that I will be okay if I don't have as much time?
I think everyone had in every career, there's a kind of imposter syndrome. And unfortunately, the imposter syndrome here is wrapped up very much with level of ability in the most ostensible progression in asana, right? Like basically like how physically good you are, which is such a shame because that doesn't obviously, we can sit here and say that doesn't make a good teacher, but when you're getting into it, you think, well, I want my teacher to be the best. Like even as a student, I think I also wanted to know my teacher was really good at yoga positions, right? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
are you kidding? Tina was my first teacher.
Yeah. And so but also amongst the community, there's this feeling of like, how far this person got, so they're that good a teacher, And I suppose also tying into that is the idea of that there's a kind of established or kind of closely kept clique around the teachings, which I think you've talked about in your post a little bit.
Yeah, and it ties back to the idea of the yoga in your life versus the yoga on your mat. And I have been wondering, and I've heard this conversation happening around me for a long time. But I wonder sometimes if the yoga on the mat is very, very successful and you get a lot of positive reinforcement for the yoga on the mat, if that sometimes hinders the yoga in your life. Like you talked about in a post recently where you were saying that you work on yourself so much and you're not really working outward because you're working inward. And I'm wondering if there are people out there who the yoga on their mat is not as impressive. So the yoga they had to do in their heart and their mind in order to persist in the yoga on their mat is well established and consistent and genuine, and they're going out into their lives and they are living this yoga because they have not had the ego reinforcement or the positive feedback for the yoga on their mat. So they are, learning these deeper lessons of self-acceptance and perseverance.
I think, it's a great cul-de-sac to go down in this. If you have ability, then it seems adequate. Like you've done your practice and you've done so much, right? Like, and you feel like, God, that's all I need to do in the day. Like it's so hard. It's so physically hard. And yes, you get accolade from it, like from peers and stuff. And you just think, well, that's all I need to do then, right? So inherently very, very essentially lazy, like, because he's, then you can just let everything else go because that's the yoga, right? Because it was so hard and so all involving, which is, and literally you're wrung out. The other thing is like the level of dynamism that the Ashtanga, and it wasn't originally like that as well. The early teachers didn't have this experience of being pushed quite so hard all the time, I think. But now the bar is set so high that the level of dynamism expected, it just leaves people with no other energy for anything else. You're completely wrung out, which is useless. Like to use all the energy that you've got in your body for the day in those hours on the mat. I mean, it just makes no sense.
I think that's a carryover from Mysore that is a misunderstanding, honestly. And one of the sadder results of what Shirat is doing in Mysore, in that when we go to Mysore, you're on vacation. It is a yoga vacation. That's what it is. You go, you practice in the morning, you have a lazy breakfast. Maybe you go to chanting class, maybe you don't. And you relax, you take a nap, you go to the pool, you go for a walk in the market, you go to bed early. You get up very early and you act like it's very hard to be there because you have to get up so early. That's all anyone ever talks about. And then you go and you do your practice again. And Shirat has said very clearly in my presence a couple of times that he doesn't expect us to do that at home. And he doesn't expect us to require that of our students, because at home, we have to live our lives. When we're in Mysore, you got nothing else to do. Leave it on your mat. That's why you're there. But when we go home, we have to find this sustainable balance of effort towards asana, as well as effort towards all of the things that make us householders. The practice is supposed to be for the householder. And I think there is a disconnect between many of the teachers coming out of Mysore who they get up early, they do their practice at like 4 a.m, and then they teach for a few hours, and then they have the rest of the day off. And they rest and they communicate with their students as if they're in Mysore, not as if they're parents who are up half the night with a sick child and folks who are going to work for 9-hour work days and people who are, rushing over to their parents' house after work to help them with one of their, people who have all of these greater responsibilities are being taught by what feels like legions of teachers coming out of Mysore who are like, you get up early every day and you sacrifice what you have to sacrifice and you leave it on your mat. And Shirat has specifically said that we're not expected to do that.
I think there's mixed messages there. I think it could be interpreted a number of ways, but you talk a lot about this kind of a sense of manipulation, that there's a kind of power dynamic where the teacher has this control over the person's practice, right? And they decide how and you talk a lot about that, how much you're going to do, right? Like you'll stop there, right? Like you can't bind in that, right? And also I'll talk a bit about that maybe, and also the weight stuff, the food and restrictive diet, which you mentioned before, and which is obviously something I've posted on as well. The fact that it does tend to help if the thinner you get in the Ashtanga, which is unfortunate because it feeds into eating issues that might already be there, with myself included historically. And so you tend to, there's a lot about this asceticism in terms of one's lifestyle, but also in terms of denying oneself food as well, which is really unfortunate. And then it comes within this teacher kind of enforcing those boundaries, saying, well, you can't bind, you can't do this, and even, even telling, I mean, there used to be that whole stuff around, too many chapatis in Mysore itself. So it was enforced. It was enforced there. Maybe that stopped now in this current age. I don't know.
I hope so, but I don't know.
Shirat's kind of got woke, and he's like, I can't, we can't say that anymore. It triggers people's eating issues, we can't say that. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think you were saying before about how sometimes you think people perceive you to be post-Ashtanga, and I have had my account referred to as an Ashtanga recovery account, and I don't mean it that way. I mean, I love the system as I was taught it. I love the idea of having someone you trust who will give you boundaries that you learn to push against them and pull back from them and recognize why they're valuable when you didn't previously. I love the idea of the series and more or less accomplishing a posture before moving on from that. I think the patience and perseverance that approach to the method teaches over the long term it has been incredibly valuable for me. So I think for a lot of people, certainly not everybody, but for a lot of people, that has a lot of value.
But that also, sorry to interject, that also suggests a kind of teacher who's more than just an asana teacher, who's giving you those saying stop. I mean, to be honest, if I'm brutally honest, I've never had the confidence to do that. I never thought that it's my role to take responsibility for someone else's practice, Mm-hmm. And I suppose that's what I put out there now is like, you come, you do as you want to. I can say, well, look, in this kind of tone, look, what you're doing at this level that might cause you problems further down the line, but I'm never going to go stop there. I'm never going to say that. And I'm never going to say, well, I'm not teaching anything other than asana, for God's sakes. I don't know anything about people's emotional internal states, their energetic states, meaning like the karma that we all have in terms of historical and genetic traumas, mm-hmm. For God's sakes, I think we need to get over ourselves at a certain point maybe and say that the teacher is, for me, the teacher has never been I don't know. I've never really been an emotional guide per se as much. I mean, a stability, a person that's there every day who I can, who I draw comfort in to that capacity, right? Like they're there as a stable point in my life, right? And that's mm-hmm. been great. But I don't know, I wouldn't ask them in terms of relationship issues or, or do you know what I mean? But the way and again, in a way, as I always do, I play devil's advocate with this, but the way that you've talked about Kino and Tim and that they are more than just a teacher, that they're actually stopping you and giving you boundaries, which, mm-hmm.
Yeah, but Kino and Tim were, from the early days, they were also kind of grooming me as their assistant and taking for granted that I would be teaching one day. So when I was stopped, shirat is a different story, of course. Shirat, you stop and you don't really get to ask questions about it.
You definitely wouldn't ask questions about that, no.
I did.
Did you?
I am that annoying person.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And I think I really benefited from that in my relationship with Shirat because I think he gave never very much, of course, but it was more when I was assisting and he would stop somebody. I didn't shy away from saying, why are you letting them go when they do it like that?
Oh, right. Okay.
Stopping them when they do it like that. Yeah. I didn't ask a lot about myself. That's
right. Okay. Right. And what did you? Right. Yeah. And what did he say about
that? He always brought it back to the individual, to say like that if there are two students who are doing the exact same thing and one was stopped and one wasn't, it was because one was at the limit of their potential at this time and the other was not, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Is very reasonable. And I think an important distinction that many of us didn't necessarily take away from our experience in Mysore. It was this like black and white, you bind the hands and you're good. And I don't know if it was a surprise to me at the time. Maybe it shouldn't have been, but Shirat's a bit more nuanced than that.
Totally. And also you can see clearly when you're standing on the sidelines in the assistant position as you were, as I was, the kind of demonstrative ego that's coming in many practices. I mean, I remember seeing him, and there's one particular person I can think of, and there's sine qua non of yoga practitioners, like an incredible practitioner. He's coming to me every practice. I'll tell this little silly anecdote because it's funny. And every practice he would say to me, I don't understand. He was doing the advanced series, he or she. And why is Shirat stopping me? I can do that. And it was like, and it's true that he could do that perfectly. Every posture was perfect. And every day he was getting stopped at the same place. And he could practice another whole series on from this. and it was getting stopped. And it's like, wait a minute. And there was this, because, there was this such a kind of level of prowess that was there, right?
Yeah.
So it does take it. It definitely, there are other things taken apart from whether you can actually physically accomplish a posture or not,
Yeah, I made that joke about myself when I started third with Shirat, that I joked that he was just throwing me a bone. I was barely hanging on through the end of intermediate, but I kept showing up and I kept doing it and I kept making terrible jokes every time he would backbend me, and so for whatever reason that, your personality, he does take into account, and how he
for sure,
treats you,
sure, yeah.
which is amazing when there's so many of us that he's able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And this is a nice, I think, thing to have on record as well, because as you can see, listeners, that, both of us have had really positive experiences, in Mysore, right?
Yeah.
But I've also, to be contrary, I've also had the experience as an assistant, which was definitely a time when I felt like I might be moving away from subservience to Mysore when I'm going over and I've been told to backbend someone and he's catching, and I'm looking at a stiff guy who's barely struggling with these backbends, and I've got one corner, the guy saying to me, "Oh my God," and the other one, Sharat, saying he's catching, and I'm like, well, you signed a paper, you made your, I'm not going to go, no, Sharat. I was like, well, okay, you're catching, and I'm going to be the messenger, and I'm going to be the messenger of this. And at a certain point, I just thought, okay, well, this is what I'm down for right now. But, I'm going to re-sign up for this. Probably not, What I can do, what I might have to do for myself is one thing. But when I'm having to kind of inflict this on someone else, it's like, well, this is, I'm not. And particularly the catching thing was where I really drew the line and thought, this is just silliness. And that really
is emotionally very difficult as the assistant when you're told that someone can do something and you can see on their face that they are not confident that they can do the thing.
Or even when they're going, oh God, and you can I can remember one guy as well who's like, oh God. And you think, well, that's what the hell? I mean, we didn't start to come here and do, yoga isn't meant, it's not meant to re-traumatize us, for God's sakes.
So I don't want to get too down the rabbit hole of discussing Shrat's method of teaching, because it's I'm sure it's changed so much in the 5 or 6 years since I've been there. So it feels a little unfair to say this is what Shirat is like. But I frequently didn't do what he told me to do as the assistant. I got to the point where I was just like, as the practitioner, I hate it when an assistant I don't know comes up and says, Shirat says you're catching, you're going to catch. Because for me, catching was like, yeah, it could happen, but it was very, very scary. And it was easy to force it physically. You could do it to me, but my experience of it was very dubious. So as the assistant, Shirat would say they're catching, and I would ask them if they were catching, and then we would go in for the catch. And if it didn't happen, it didn't happen. And I would just shrug and walk away. And he never responded badly. Much like in my practice, there were a handful of times where he said, do this or do it this way or do it again. And I just said, no, I can't, not today. And he never responded badly.
Right.
And I think it's significant that the level of deference and surrender, tying back to what we were talking about earlier, we're so programmed to do exactly what we're told that if we never push back, we don't actually know what happens if we don't do what we're told. And in my experience with Shirat, he would give me these very clear guidelines. And if I strayed from them, he was actually okay with it. And I felt like there was this level of acceptance of like, yeah, okay, you're an adult. Like I'm not actually there to just
I think, and
be an
also
automaton.
the interesting thing, and as you mentioned in Mysore, is that different people really have different experiences of. I mean, like Shirat is really, really tough on some people, and other people really, like they're very, very, very soft,
Yeah.
And I think it was a little bit in the middle. But yeah, they're very different to different people. Some people really got a hard time.
Yeah, I don't think I was one of those people. I think he was always nice to me.
I mean, there still is this aspect. I mean, and again, we used to hear a lot, no pain, no gain, like, but, this kind of pushing through pain and almost being in pain was, I mean, I can remember the first time I kind of almost felt like a kind of, you have an injury, you can then have something to talk about. Do you know what I mean? Oh, I've got this injury, it's like a mark of your, a badge of honor, like, well, I've really tried really hard and I'm really committed to this. I'm really committed to this because not only have I, like sacrificed my whole daily life to this, I'm also injured,
Not only are you injured, but you're practicing anyway.
Yeah, and I'm really in pain, but I'm going to practice anyway. It's like, but I mean, again, I think it's worth noting again that one thing I really love on your Instagram profile is the Venn diagrams and the way that it's a Venn diagram, right? When you have the circles, that's a Venn, right? Good. and I remember a bit of math, and so you got the Venn diagram, and because it is like there's no one like polarity, right? It's not like like mice or vinyasa flow with you make up your own sequences and like you whack on the music. It's like, I still practice the sequence. I still have an inordinate respect for Mysore. I still I love looking at. I still have reverence for looking at pictures of Sharathji. I'm not sure I could look at Patabi Royce in the same way again, to be quite honest. But nevertheless, I mean, like I still would say, like, I have respect for him as someone who did an inordinate amount of good in spreading the method, although I have, I have reservations and ambiguities in my feelings about him currently. So, it is this Venn diagram where there is a black and white, and yeah, what do you say about that?
I think we're all doing our best, and it becomes very difficult to determine what our best is when we don't have a sounding board or we don't have feedback. So Shirat is in a uniquely difficult position where he doesn't have peers to help with decision making. He has to decide everything that he's going to do pretty much by himself. And that's very difficult. And, if he missteps, then it's entirely on him. And he has also these wild cultural differences from the majority of his student base that impact his choices that are then confusing to us. And that's really hard. And I think that carries down to like every level of teacher, in that, the more prominent of a teacher you are, the less of a peer base you have to help you know where to draw the line in terms of like what kind of teaching is functional, what's helpful to people, what's just kind of boosting your own ego. Where do you draw the line between making money and getting exposure versus actually trying to teach people the method? Like, that's one thing I loved about the Mysore style Ashtanga teaching, is that you are actually teaching people the yoga instead of kind of presenting the yoga and letting people follow along. And all of
what does that teaching entail? I mean, because one could learn that from a book or a cheat sheets, So what is when you're saying
so that's what I think. I think a book or a video, you're following along with it. You're not having an individual person look at your individual experience and say, try to approach it in this different way and see if that works better, or if there's more value in that, or to have a teacher say to you, I see that you are trying in this direction and it's not getting you the result you want. Do you want to try a different direction, or do you want to keep trying this for longer? Like I said, I was a very verbal teacher. I wanted to dialogue a great deal with the students about their emotional experience and why they were doing things the way they were doing them, because I found so often that our intention behind the effort is more significant than the actual physical effort itself. It impacts it so heavily. And in the long run, that's kind of why I stopped teaching, because I got so much pushback from more traditional teachers, from the you do, stop there, this is the next posture, figure it out, practice, use your bandha teachers that said, I talk too much and I interrupt the flow of their practice. And it's look, if you interrupt the flow of someone's practice for 5 minutes, 1 day a week, and it changes their emotional relationship to success and failure, then that interruption is worth it.
Gotcha.
If you let them keep doing the thing they're doing and keep failing and feeling terrible and keep having these successes and being elated, but because their ego is padded, then you're not teaching them yoga. You're presenting them with shapes and letting them make shapes. But as a yoga teacher, for me, and I don't really think this is in line with the Ashtanga method as most people perceive it, but for me, I wanted to teach yoga. I wanted to help people learn how their mind works and how their heart responds to what their mind is doing when their body is being challenged. And that's not a very popular thought. That's not a popular way to approach Ashtanga.
Yeah, and I wonder why, really, because it sounds so reasonable when you're saying it. And why wouldn't it be? I suppose emotional dialoguing is not really the domain of which I still see as a kind of yoga patriarchy, really, which is kind of scared of emotions, really.
Yeah, I
becoming too emotional. I don't know.
There's a level of empathy
of actually having to, as a teacher, actually having to come down your pedestal and actually engage and emote with the student. It's frightening. Yeah. It's because it's easy to be a teacher. It's I go to Mysore and I've got my authority and I have to be, and I'm other than you, and I'm essentially an authority, and it's not a democracy here, and you're over there, and there's a big divide between us. And rather than I'm a person, you're a person, and I also have advanced series practice, but I also get afraid, get depressed, get anxious, have bad, and I'm exactly the same as you, for God's sake. But it's difficult because also you've got to be an inspiring figure. So it is, and I find the dichotomy a little bit there, because I really try and be absolutely transparently honest. This is me, and I'm nothing different to you. But on the other hand, if you become too much like that, then the teacher, why do I come to this person in the first place? Because I've nothing to aspire to. He's just like me, he's just a ruined human being, neurotic, and what can I get from this? If I'm coming to this person who's clearly telling me they're as neurotic as I am, well, that's not an inspiration, But on the other hand, it's I kick back against hierarchy and the expert and the authority to quite a degree that I want it to be a very democratic process. But when you become too democratic as well, like what you were talking about, you're going around being this traveling teacher, and then there's you go to a student and they go, well, I've been taught by Keela, I've been taught by Tim, I've been taught by David, I've been taught by Richard, I've been taught by Shirat. Who do I listen to here? And it's there's something about having a relationship, a consistent relationship with one person over a period of time, Which, although I'd never want to say, well, you should just be my student because it will benefit you if you just pick your teacher. And I don't like this mentality either. But on the other hand, I think there's definitely be something in a consistent relationship with one person, right?
Well, it's the vulnerability. I feel like to be a good teacher, as well as to be a good student, you have to make yourself vulnerable to one another because you really can't truly trust someone who is not vulnerable to you. And as a student, the expectation in the system is that as a student, you make yourself vulnerable to your teacher, but your teacher is not expected to offer that back to you. And that's what I really push back against, because that's where the danger is. You, as a student, you are going to learn the most from your practice, I think, if you are vulnerable with your experience. And I think as human beings, we're not great at being honest with ourselves, honest about our motivations, honest about our emotional experience.
And I think we're also idealistic. We want, I came into it. I wanted a guru. I wanted an enlightened guru, right? Like we're quite romantic in our ideals. Right?
You want someone who's omniscient. Basically, you want someone who knows without you having to know yourself. I think that's part of this like magic that we talk about with Mysore and the old guard, that we want to be able to go into this experience not knowing ourselves and have someone else be able to see us truly as we are and tell us who we are. And that's not how it works. We have to discover for ourselves who we are. And the practice, I think just being consistent with the practice and going through the suffering and going through the elation of successes and failures in the practice will teach us who we are. But I also think that if someone has been doing the practice for 10, 15, 20 years, then they know how the practice taught themselves who they are. They know where they learn, if they're trying to observe, which not everyone does. Sometimes the work is done and you don't really know how it happened, but you, as a teacher, can recognize like, oh, I went through this difficult experience with the practice, and it taught me this thing about myself and how I process difficulty or suffering or anxiety or, discomfort or discontent. And you then have a tool to say to your student, if you are feeling this way, it could be because of X, Y, and Z. I had this experience at this point, and I held myself back because I was holding on to, X, Y, and Z. But if you as a teacher don't allow yourself to expose your student to your own growth and your own vulnerability, then I think that's doing them a disservice. If you try to present yourself as a fully complete, self-knowing, finished practitioner up on this pedestal, and that's something your students are like, I don't know, trying to become, but you're not really telling them how you did it. You're just saying like, keep going, which, we have catchphrases for that, like 99% practice, 1% theory. But like, I can't get behind that. I feel like the more we are able to help each other, and but
also there's a wish for lack of transparency, right? It's just like a chef not wanting to expose his secrets. Like you just like, for many teachers, like, well, let's not have a dialogue around this because I'm here and I don't want you to be here as well, because there's this huge thing with, I've got to be the teacher, so I've got to be the most knowing and the best at asana and, and the most, like authority on Mysore and how it's done. Because if I tell everyone else it's like, well, there's this, like there'll be a Shala here and a Shala down the road. And, so there's definitely this kind of, like protectiveness protectionism around the teaching.
I was told I would, this was by a loving student. I was told that I wouldn't be a successful teacher because I spent all of my time trying to prove to everyone that they didn't need me.
Oh God, I always say that my job is to try and make myself redundant. No, it's like you can say that if you've got enough students, and then you kind of you got 5 students. Oh God, maybe you need me after all.
It didn't work, so or maybe it did work.
I think it has worked. So just to finish off, what are you doing now? I mean, first of all, to end, do you do those drawings? They're amazing.
Yeah.
You do them. So how did you learn to draw like that? And do you use my wife says she uses some kind of computer program and draws on it. Is that what you do?
I draw on my iPad. Yeah.
Okay. Fucking amazing.
I used to work in a tattoo shop. I'm not a tattooer, but I worked in a shop and watched the process that they go through and observed a lot of an apprenticeship for one of the tattoo apprentices. And that's kind of why I started drawing, because I was like, if this clown can do it, so can I.
I'll be like,
so I do it on an app, which is incredibly forgiving. You know, you can layer it and add layers on and take layers off and alter mistakes very easily. You know, you have your reference art right there on the page. It's the app is what makes it possible. I had to draw some stuff on a piece of paper for Halloween, and it was not as elegant.
Oh, really? Right. So it's the program kind of helps you draw.
For sure. Just because it's so forgiving, because I can change things so easily. It doesn't like damage the paper or leave a marker. It even has things where you can like kind of warp it, like stretch it, make it taller, or like make it wider.
Right. Cool.
Yeah. But it still takes a great deal of time, which is why
the content is fantastic. Yeah.
The content I have in spades. But the drawings themselves are what take forever. But I have 2 small children.
Kids, okay.
A 1-year-old and a 3-year-old.
Oh, I didn't know one. Oh God, right.
Yeah, in a pandemic. So
Right.
So that's pretty much my life is dealing with them and squeezing in practice when I can, and trying to still spend time with my husband and keep in touch with my friends, and it's a lot. We also have a dog. He's wonderful. He's very active and
Well, I suppose thanks for coming on. It's been a pleasure to chat to you. And as always, I always feel I get off the podcast and think, God, we should have talked more about that or that or that. But I think it gives a good overview of maybe some of our thoughts and some of your thoughts. And keep on doing the good work on. I love your account, and I'm looking forward to seeing more content when you've got the time.
Thanks. Well, I'm sure I'll be a bad Ashtangi and listen to your backlog of podcasts while I'm practicing.
That's excellent. That's an excellent use of multitasking and time. Absolutely. Do it. All right. Well, thanks again for coming on, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.